Many men believe that when a wife walks away, her life will fall apart. She will feel lonely, guilty, and full of regret. But reality is far more unsettling. Divorce is not just the end of a marriage, it activates something deep inside the mind, something history and psychology have already mapped out. In a short time, the woman you knew begins to change, not randomly, but by following the same pattern seen for generations. First comes the crash. Her status drops, her finances shake, her comfort disappears. Then comes the escape. Seeking attention, chasing excitement, jumping from one temporary thrill to another. But when the excitement dies, bitterness rises. She rewrites the past, paints herself as the victim, and turns you into the enemy in her story. This is not chaos. This is a program. A hidden instinct in human nature that wakes up after loss. And once you understand this, you realize something powerful. The woman she becomes after divorce is not shaped by you. She was always on this path. Knowing this is where your freedom begins. The party phase. When the financial and social foundation crumbles, the mind does not sit in stillness. It races, searching for comfort, for something to drown out the ache of loss. And here, history offers us a familiar pattern. In the plague-stricken London of 1665, Samuel Pepys described widows who, stripped of husbands, income, and social standing, rushed into new attachments almost instantly. Some aligned themselves with wealthy merchants, others with officials of questionable morals. To neighbors, it looked indecent, widows finding company within days of burial. But Pepys saw clearly. This was not lust, it was survival. When the instinct to endure takes over, morality is easily pushed aside. In the modern world, the stage has changed, but the script remains. Instead of rumors whispered down cobblestone streets, it is now Instagram posts and Facebook updates announcing the transformation. The woman once known as a quiet suburban wife is suddenly photographed at bars, on beaches, in expensive restaurants. Captions speak of freedom and discovery. But in reality, this is not growth, it is anesthesia. Psychologists call this short-term mating strategy, a rapid string of flings, affairs, or casual connections. The aim is not permanence, it is validation. Each new partner, each new experience is proof that she is still wanted, still attractive, still relevant in the social marketplace. Research confirms this. A University of Michigan study analyzing national data found that in the first year after divorce, women enter new relationships at a rate 40% higher than men. But these unions rarely last. They ignite quickly, then collapse just as fast. They are not built for stability, they are built to distract. And that is the essence of the party phase. It works like a drug. Just as painkillers numb the body without healing the wound, the thrill of new partners and glamorous outings numbs the emptiness without resolving it. The bright dinners replace the family table. The noise of concerts covers the silence of an empty house. The photos on social media are real smiles, but they capture the relief of escape, not the peace of contentment. But every high fades. Nights out blur into repetition. The attention loses its power. The relationships end as suddenly as they began. The laughter begins to sound hollow. The validation stops working. And when the mask slips, reality returns. The frantic rush for pleasure cannot go on forever. And when it ends, something darker takes its place. Bitterness. The party phase is not the final state. It is a bridge, a temporary detour where fear, instinct, and biology collide to delay the inevitable reckoning. But every bridge has an end. And when this one ends, she is not left stronger. She is left facing a harsher truth, stripped of distractions. The anesthetic wears off. The noise fades. And in that heavy silence, the first sparks of resentment begin to grow. The crash. The problem with every numbing agent is the same. It wears off. The so-called party phase is no exception. No matter how many late nights are spent in crowded rooms, no matter how many weekends are filled with trips or new faces, the glow eventually fades. The clubs empty, the lovers drift away. The notifications on social media slow to a trickle. And what remains is not excitement, but silence. It is within that silence that the true crash begins. She may try to outrun it, booking another holiday, saying yes to another casual romance, searching for yet another distraction. But somewhere inside, she begins to sense that the thrill is gone. What once felt intoxicating now feels shallow. The rush of independence curdles into unease, then ripens into something heavier: bitterness. This bitterness does not explode loudly. It seeps in quietly, like water through cracks. It shows itself when she finally pauses long enough to ask a dangerous question: why am I still unhappy? That question threatens the illusion because it points toward the truth. No amount of distraction can replace what was lost. But admitting that would be unbearable. And so the mind takes an easier path. It seeks a culprit. That culprit is rarely the self. To accept her own role would mean facing regret, and regret is a weight too crushing to carry. Instead, the blame is projected outward. The ex-husband becomes the perfect vessel. He becomes the explanation for the emptiness, the symbol of every failure, the reason for every shadow that follows her. The crash is more than emotional collapse. It is a kind of psychological armor. To protect itself from despair, the mind begins quietly reshaping the past. What was once a complicated marriage with shared flaws is recast into a stark, one-sided tale. The inner voice begins its chant. He wasted my years. He destroyed my joy. He is the reason my life feels broken, the number that opens the story. When people picture divorce, they usually imagine it in emotional terms: sadness, loneliness, anger. But the impact of divorce can be measured in cold numbers, and those numbers paint a far harsher picture. One figure rises above all others: 73. According to a major study published in the Journal of Health and Social Behavior, within just 18 months after divorce, 73% of women experience a sharp decline in their standard of living. In simple terms, nearly 3 out of 4 women face a serious financial and social fall. This isn't about losing a little extra spending money. It isn't about skipping the occasional meal out or delaying the purchase of new clothes. It is far more severe. It represents the collapse of an entire lifestyle. The spacious home is exchanged for a cramped apartment. Children who once had access to better schools and steady activities suddenly face cutbacks. Trips to the grocery store, once routine, now feel like tense exercises in budgeting. What can be bought today, what has to wait, what must be abandoned entirely. Holidays, vacations, even simple comforts begin to vanish. The once secure life begins to feel shaky. This kind of collapse strikes on multiple fronts. Materially, the comforts shrink. Socially, others begin to notice: neighbors, relatives, friends, and with that comes comparison, embarrassment, and shame. Psychologically, the impact cuts even deeper, because for many women, their sense of safety and identity was tied directly to their marriage. Picture it like a house. The marriage provided the walls and roof. When the divorce decree is signed, it is as if the structure is torn away overnight. The furniture remains, the memories remain, but the protection is gone. What once felt safe now stands exposed. And here lies the critical truth. This external collapse, while easy to see and measure, is not the full story. It is only the spark. The financial and social drop is the first domino, setting off a chain reaction inside the mind. Because once the outside world crumbles, the inner world is forced to react. And it rarely does so calmly. It reacts with fear, with frantic searching, with patterns so regular that psychologists and historians can predict them with frightening accuracy. The number 73 is not just a statistic. It is the first line in a predictable script, a pattern that has repeated itself in countless lives. It marks the beginning of the unraveling, a fall that does not end with money, but opens the door to a far more dangerous storm inside the psyche. And that storm is where we now turn our focus. Narrative splitting. When the high fades and the silence takes over, the emptiness becomes unbearable. The nights out are finished, the distractions lose their shine, and the mind begins searching for an explanation. But turning inward, admitting that some of the suffering comes from her own choices, is far too painful. Regret means responsibility, and responsibility would demand change. So instead, the mind takes another path. It rewrites the past. This rewriting is not random or chaotic. Psychologists call it narrative splitting. It is the reduction of a messy, complicated history into a clear and simple tale. Heroes and villains, innocence and guilt, right and wrong. Dr. J.M. Diamond's long-term study of over 500 divorced couples captured this process with disturbing clarity. In the immediate aftermath of separation, when emotions were fresh, both men and women still spoke with nuance. They admitted their own part in the collapse. They described their marriages as layered and complex, filled with mistakes on both sides. In those first months, the past still held shades of gray. But 18 months later, the stories had shifted dramatically. For many women, the subtleties were gone. The gray areas had been erased. The complicated years of shared laughter, struggle, and love were recast as a flat narrative of harm. In this retelling, she was the victim, enduring years of mistreatment. He was the villain, the sole architect of her pain. A decade or more of life together collapsed into a single fable: betrayal. This shift does more than distort memory. It reshapes identity itself. She no longer sees herself as a flawed partner in a failed relationship. She now sees herself as a survivor, someone who endured cruelty and escaped. That new identity becomes the filter through which she interprets everything: the past, the present, even her children's view of their father. For the ex-husband, this change feels unreal. He hears charges that sound nothing like the marriage he remembers. Ordinary disagreements are reframed as emotional abuse. Financial strain becomes proof of selfishness. Small imperfections are magnified into lifelong patterns of cruelty. To him, it feels like entering a false reality. To her, it feels like survival. The function of narrative splitting is not accuracy, it is defense. By painting him as the monster, she shields herself from the unbearable weight of doubt. If he was always the problem, then she was justified in leaving. If he was always cruel, then she bears no blame. This is why reason, evidence, and logic fall flat. The fortress of her new story is not built on facts, it is built on the need to survive emotionally. And once constructed, it cannot be dismantled by arguments or proof. Narrative splitting is not just a coping strategy, it is the foundation of the next stage. Once the tale is rewritten, resentment has an endless supply of fuel. And with that fuel, the fire can burn quietly but fiercely for years, even decades. The fortress of resentment. Once the marriage is reimagined as a simple tale of victim and villain, the story begins to solidify. Over time, it stops shifting and instead hardens into something permanent. What forms is not just a belief, but a structure, a fortress built out of resentment. Like any fortress, its purpose is protection. Each negative memory becomes a stone. Each flaw of the ex-husband becomes cement. Every disappointment, big or small, is repurposed as evidence to strengthen the walls. Even neutral or innocent moments, when filtered through bitterness, are twisted into weapons. Inside these walls, the ex-husband is stripped of his humanity. He ceases to be a man and becomes a symbol, a constant reminder of all she feels was stolen from her. If money runs short, it must be his fault. If a child struggles with school, he is to blame. If she feels lonely, it is because of the years he took from her. But the danger of this fortress is not only that it shields her from doubt, it slowly consumes everything else. The bitterness seeps into conversations with friends, which turn into rehearsals of the same story of betrayal. Workplace challenges are traced back to him. Even new romantic partners find themselves measured against the villain she claims to have escaped, leaving trust impossible. And then there are the children. Often, they too are pulled inside the fortress. Not always out of cruelty, but because the story demands allegiance. If she is the victim and he is the villain, the children are expected to take sides. They hear things like, "Your father doesn't really care," or "We can't do this because of what he's done." Sometimes the messages are subtle, other times explicit, but the outcome is the same. The child is asked to inhabit the fortress as well. This reshaping doesn't only alter the past, it distorts the present. Children may begin repeating her bitterness, voicing words that are not their own but echoes of her narrative. Their bond with their father becomes strained, not because of what truly happened, but because of the story that has to be preserved. The great resentment is not a sudden rage, it is a slow, steady fire. Unlike the wild chaos of the party phase, this stage is calm, methodical, and enduring. It eats away at memory, corrodes trust, and reshapes reality. It can last years, even decades. For the ex-husband, it is disorienting. Any attempt to defend himself, to show facts, to reason, only strengthens the walls. Every denial is twisted into proof. Every explanation is reframed as manipulation. He is no longer in dialogue with a person. He is battling a fortress designed to make him the enemy. And that is the tragedy of resentment. It is not simply an emotion, but a construction, a prison of the mind that traps not just her, but everyone around her inside its walls. At this stage, the cycle has reached its completion. Collapse led to the party. The party ended in the crash. The crash triggered the rewriting of the past. And now, with resentment set in stone, the foundation is ready for the next evolution. What follows is no longer reaction, but transformation. From these ashes emerge three enduring archetypes: the perpetual victim, the hardened realist, and the rare reborn phoenix. The three archetypes. When the storm finally settles, women do not remain undefined. The chaos gives way to form, and almost always, she falls into one of three enduring patterns, each shaping her future, her children, and even the shadow she leaves over her former husband. The first is the eternal victim. She never lets go of the wound. The divorce is not just something that happened, it becomes the defining mark of her identity. Every setback, every failure, is filtered through that story. She finds refuge in blaming, but she never finds release. The second is the hardened realist. After being scorched by disappointment, she redirects all energy toward independence and survival. She often thrives financially, carving out her own stability, but she pays with her heart. Relationships are no longer built on trust, but on calculation. Love becomes a liability, intimacy a risk. She wins autonomy, but loses closeness. And then there is the phoenix, the rarest outcome. This woman does what most cannot. She looks at her own role in the collapse without flinching. Through brutal honesty, she accepts her part and transforms it into power. She does not attempt to rebuild the old life. Instead, she forges a new one from the ashes, stronger, steadier, and anchored in self-respect. These are not simple labels. They are the natural end states of a psychological storm, a storm unleashed when the marriage ended and the fortress of resentment took hold. The final truth. The question then becomes, what determines which of these paths she walks? Is it money, lawyers, or the therapist's advice? None of these. They influence circumstances, but not destiny. The real answer lies far deeper, in who she was before the marriage even began. If she carried into the relationship a clear sense of self, her own values, her own goals, an identity not entirely bound to the role of wife, then she has a foundation to stand on when the marriage ends. Such a woman, though scarred, can rise as a phoenix. She rebuilds because her worth was never wholly dependent on being someone's partner. But if her entire self was built upon the marriage, her status, her identity, her sense of value tied only to being a wife, then when that role vanishes, so does her foundation. She is left with nothing firm beneath her. For her, the likely outcomes are grim. Either the eternal victim, chained to grievance, or the hardened realist, sealed off in cold independence. Here is the brutal revelation. Her direction was never yours to dictate. It wasn't set by your failures or your successes as a husband. It was determined years before you even entered her story, written in the architecture of her own inner world. And this is where the liberation comes for men. You were never the dragon she later painted you as. You were never the knight who failed to rescue her. You are simply a man who now sees the blueprint clearly. Her path was her own from the start. That realization is freedom. Freedom from carrying her narrative. Freedom from defending yourself against distortions built for her survival. Freedom to step out of the ruins of her story and into the blank page of your own. The marriage was only a chapter, her unraveling another. But your book is not finished. The final truth is this: once you recognize the script she follows, you no longer have to play a part in it. You can close her book and finally begin writing your own.